everybody. Welcome to the Training, Learning, and Development community. We have another member showcase today. We've had a busy week. This is our third one of the week, and I'm really looking forward to this one. We've got Mac Macdonald from LAPD Solutions in the UK here with us today. And wow, Mac has a really interesting background. It's like so much about him, his moccasin approach. I've been reading about it, and I'm so excited to be able to chat with Mac today. So let's see. Before we get going, I want to give a shout out to some of the folks that are already in our live audience. We've got Leslie is here, and Joe. Hey, Joe, Maria, Gabby, Duncan, Tom McDowell, Sion, Michelle, Danny, Val, Tim C. Thanks so much for joining us. So you guys probably already know this format. We've got about 30 minutes where we're going to talk with Mac. If you guys have questions, feel free to add them to the chat or just drop them into the ask a question area. And I've already got a set of questions in there. I actually have just been thinking about some of these questions for a while that I wanted to ask him because his background is so interesting, and he's got a concept that he built out called the moccasin approach that I'm really interested in. We're going to be talking about emotional intelligence. And so let's get started. All right, Mac, how are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you very much. Yeah, looking forward to this.
All right. So let's start out with your background, your career in training. You've been doing this for over 30 years, over 3 decades. And can you tell us a little bit how did your journey start? How did you learn about instructional design, and how did that all happen?
Do you know, the other thing is I was actually talking about this morning at another meeting. But to be honest, I joined the army, and I actually joined as a driver. But as I was 6'3", one guy turned around to me one day and said, "You'd make a great trainer." I said, "Oh, thank you very much." He said, "No, you are going to be a trainer." And I said, "I'm a driver." And he said, "Not anymore." And I became a trainer because of that. And luckily, when he got me involved in the training sessions, I discovered I had a bit of a flair for it. And it really made me think, this is fantastic. I love this. I wanted to be more of it, you know. And he recognized that, and he sent me on a course. I came back and I was teaching, what was it? The first course I did was nuclear, biological, chemical warfare. And although it sounds very sort of crazy, it actually just let me loose on training people about that. And then I got recognized and went and did face first aid, all sort of military type courses you can imagine. And then the magic happened when they said, "Will you do leadership and management?" And that's when it really opened up, because I didn't like the way the military taught leadership. I didn't like the way they taught man management, as you used to call it back in those days. So I kind of rebelled. I mean, the autistic streak means that I tend to say things just because I think they should be said. I don't have as many filters as neurotypical people. But that didn't bode well at the start of my career until one day, luckily, when I got in trouble by saying something, the brigadier just said, "Let's have a chat about what your thinking is." And I ended up teaching potential officers. So that was it. The fire was lit.
Wow, that is really fascinating. Okay, so I'm going to start sort of from the beginning. Driver to trainer. And so what did you initially start? Were you training other drivers? Is that how you started doing that? Or?
No, I literally joined the army as a driver to drive trucks, Land Rovers, you mentioned it.
I see.
And I literally passed my truck driving license, you might say, got back to the depot, and this guy just spotted me and he said, "We need somebody, and you're 6'3", and you'll be great." And that was it. Come over here and get into this platoon.
Do you remember what your first subject that you had to train was? Was it the
NBC, the nuclear, biological, chemical warfare? Yeah, that was it. And I found it fascinating because it's a little bit sort of technical, and it's, you know, obviously a huge subject, but that just gripped me. So it was something that most people didn't like to train, and for some reason I just loved it.
That is amazing. And then you're talking about how sort of the autistic aspect of, you know, that you're not neurotypical. Or now, how did that? Tell us a little bit more about that journey. Like when the brigadier brought up that wanted to pull you aside to talk to you about that. How did you explore that side of yourself?
Well, at the time, I didn't know. In fact, the autistic diagnosis only happened a few years ago. And I always thought after the army that it was just because I'd been in the army that I was very regimented. I liked things in a certain order. I didn't like change, you know. I had patterns, and then there were certain things about me that I thought just came from childhood, like certain textures, noise. And I spoke to somebody one day who turned around and said, "Have you ever been for a test on autism?" And the story, you know, is, yeah, I'm now diagnosed. But back then, speaking your mind in the army wasn't a great idea, especially if it was to somebody senior, or saying you didn't like how the army did leadership. It was just a very bad idea. But something obviously resonated with this guy, and he got me and he sat me down. He said, "Tell me what you would do if you had a free rein." So I thought, okay, so I did. And I just spoke my mind. And oddly enough, now many years later, what I now find is that since I've been out on my own, clients either love it or hate it. Some people call it the Marmite effect, you know. They either like the fact you come in and say, "Well, actually, I think you need to do this and this is why, and you're not doing it the right way," or they get really upset and think you're being very rude and ask you to leave. You know, and I think, well, why ask me what's wrong if you don't want me to tell you the truth? It doesn't make sense.
That's really interesting. Hey, so that having that sort of the neurodiverse, I think is the terminology I've been hearing a lot. Like, how has that impacted the way that that you've approached your training now?
Well, you know, I'd say it's a double-edged sword, and there are certain disadvantages because I don't quite get some things. I don't usually get a certain type of sarcasm or humor, but it doesn't really affect me that much. But I think when the psychologist that diagnosed me said, "The fact you're a trainer is fascinating." He said, because autistic people generally have a hard time doing eye contact for any length of time at all. And I said, "Oh, yeah, I got over that." And he said, "Well, how did you do that?" And I sat in front of the telly watching programs like news, or where there was a hosting event and they would be staring straight at you. And that's how I got to understand I just need to lock the eye contact, etc., and do that. But I think the biggest advantage I've had from it is I've said to people when I go in, like this morning, I met a new client in Coventry. And as soon as we got chatting, I said, "Look, something you need to know. If you ask me something, I'll tell you exactly what I think. No holds barred." So it's just an autistic thing. And he had a friend who was autistic, and he said, "Oh, that's great. That's what I want." And from the conversation we had last week to the 2 hours we spent chatting this morning, there was a whole different shift in the aim of where we're going now, because he started telling me things about how the organization works. And I was going, you know, that's not so good. And then we got into the emotional intelligence thing, and that lit us fire a lot. So I think there's an advantage to it. And I think if you're positive about that, I mean, some people actually call it a disability, and I certainly don't. I think in some ways I benefit from it. And the clients seem to like it.
Wow, that is fascinating. There is so much there I would love to talk about. In fact, I mean, neurodiversity is something that I've been talking to some other community members about, possibly doing some events surrounding that. So maybe I can contact you to possibly discuss that more at length. So, okay. So now you touched a little bit on the emotional intelligence sort of piece that I know that I was really fascinated when I was reading about the moccasin approach. Let me ask first, like, as far as emotional intelligence is concerned, what was the catalyst that got you to really focus on emotional intelligence as something that you wanted to train people on?
Yeah, slightly embarrassing answer, but it's a truthful one. Part of my way my brain works is that I really need to do the right thing. So when I see something that I don't like, I'll tend to do something or say something about it, which is not always a very healthy thing. And after a bit of, I think I'll call it a confrontation whilst driving on the motorway, the police were very quick to point out to me that I wasn't being very intelligent about how I was reacting. That's the politest way I can put that. And when I was chatting to someone literally the next morning about this incident on the motorway, they said, "Have you read anything about emotional intelligence?" I said, "I never heard about it." And I grabbed a book by a couple of authors, Travis Bradbury and Jean Greaves, from Talent Smart, big US organization out there that does fantastic work with EI. And I read it, and it was just, the thing I loved about it was a very short, quick book, and it's literally called The Quick Book of EI, and it's in layman's terms. And these guys did research of over 500,000 people, and I just fell in love with it straight away. And that's when I started teaching EI. But oddly enough, it wasn't until I was teaching EI for a couple of years, I suddenly thought, EI shouldn't be on its own. EI actually should be going the way through time management, communication skills especially. I teach a thing called interactive presentation skills, which is different to just presenting, and EI is in that. So we have it in everything now. And as you said, that moccasin approach underpins everything we do.
Okay. So let's talk about the moccasin approach. Can you describe exactly what that is? Is it something that you personally developed, or like what's the origin of it?
Yeah, it was many years ago. I was chatting, and I kept saying to people, I got that sort of, you get a phrase sometimes in training, and it works, and you use it. And I was saying, look, you need to step into the other people's shoes. You just sit in their seat. And one person turned around one day and said to me, "Oh, you mean like walk a mile in someone's moccasins?" And it really resonated. And I said, "Oh, I'm going to pinch that." So I thought it was an old sort of Indian saying, etc. And I'd heard that from many, many people until I researched it. And it turns out it's from a poem by a woman called Millie Lathrop in 1895. And she was basically saying, yeah, walk a mile in someone else's shoes or moccasins. So I like that. And it really made me think, well, that's exactly what I've been saying to people for years. So I took that and I said, we need that moccasin approach. So if I was teaching you something and said, what's the moccasin approach? It is literally that. It's before you communicate with someone, think about it from their perspective. And if you don't really know that person and their world properly, you can't really do that. So that part of social awareness in emotional intelligence is critical. And in fact, I would go as far as to say the moccasin approach won't work unless you have that. So for example, you and I have really just met properly. And if we were going to be able to have that type of relationship where I could literally see things from your shoes, I'd have to understand a lot more about you. Your passions, likes, dislikes, worries, concerns, desires, everything. And then we could communicate completely openly and honestly. And that's the key to the emotional intelligence side, which Brits find really challenging because we're very polite and very sort of, how's things going? Absolutely fine today, even though it might not be, Whereas really EI is about being intelligent with your emotions. So if you're not feeling good, say so. Right. That's how it works.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, tell me, like, from your experience implementing emotional intelligence, like say in a workplace environment, what kind of impact have you seen something like the moccasin approach having on say a workplace?
I was very lucky. A few years ago, a professor at a university sat me down and said, "I'm fascinated by what you're doing and I want to know about your background." And he started asking me what degree I'd done in university. And I said, "I never went to university." And he said, "Do you want to?" And I said, "No, this was in 2017. And I went, "No, not a chance." And he eventually got me to come down to the university, Middlesex University in London. And I went down, met him and a colleague, and he basically took me through an assessment from my experience of all the years I've worked. And he said, "We can get you onto a master's degree and you could do emotional intelligence." So through that coercing of these two fine professors, I ended up signing up to the master's course. And it was a research-based master's. So I went to a company and said, "I want to do a master's course. I'm going to be doing a leadership course with you guys, all based on the moccasin approach and EI. Can I use your people as my cohort for research?" And they said, "Yeah." So the beauty of that was I got interviews done before they even really met me properly and knew what it was about. And I could ask them about their relationships and work, all that sort of stuff. And then halfway through, we did a sort of sense check. And then 3 months after the finish of the leadership package, we went back in and said, "Right, how is it from when it was to where it is now?" And I was hoping for a good result, clearly, because that's what I was basing my master's on. But the result I got was breathtaking. It was all about, for me, emotional intelligence in the workplace is about getting the relationships right. Because once you get those right, everything else falls into place, even down to organizational culture, which is an extraordinarily complex thing to get right. Yes. EI just is the thing that filters up through the roots and calms everybody down and allows that really what we call clean communication with clean information. Everybody can say exactly what they want. And that's really what we got from that, was how much better. And what was interesting was it wasn't just internal relationships, it was even consultants and councils. The meetings they went to, they managed to build far better relationships and got things done quicker. So a real success.
Where do you start with it? Say you walking into an organization, is it a thing where is it a hierarchical sort of approach where you start with the executives and then sort of go down, or like how do you even begin that type of an endeavor?
Oh, that's such a big question. And I'll tell you why, because I'd say something like 95% of the organizations I've worked with over the years have said, "Yeah, come on in and speak to this person down here who runs the training, but we're okay. We know everything about leadership and management. So you teach those people down there. And it isn't, we always say top down, it's got to come top down. And my real gift in the last couple of years has been 2 new clients. And one of them I'm just starting a leadership package with in October. And I'm starting with the top people in the organization. You know, brilliant. Their attitude already sings so much about their positivity, their openness in the organization. And when you start seeing these senior people saying, yeah, I want to be on the course, and we go, well, you know, there's going to be some junior people, I don't care. This is about me learning what I should be doing. You know, that's fantastic. Really good quality people. So we're doing a whole 10-month program with them, and we've got another organization coming in, and I told them what we were doing with them, and they took me down. I met the 2 founders, and he says, yep, we want these guys right at the top with the leadership to be done first, and then you cascade through the rest of the people. And that's the way it has to go. Because as you, I'm sure, know yourself, and you'll have heard the stories many, many times, we sometimes go into the organization, we teach middle management or sometimes even senior management, and there's that oil and water point at the top, and they just don't get any further. They're just hitting their heads off it. You get so many people in workshops going, are they going to be doing this? Because they need this, you know. Yeah. That's so common.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I love it. I'm just so fascinated by this right now. Just because I really like to explore culture within organizations and sort of understanding of it. I don't want to stay too long just talking about this, but just one, I want to know 2 things. What was like so far your biggest challenge in with the moccasin approach and bringing it to an organization, and then also like your biggest success? And then I'll move on to something else.
Okay. Biggest challenge is I worked in an organization for 4.5 years, doing a great job. Everybody loved what I was doing. They thought it was very, very useful. But again, it was the oil and water thing that was happening. So I pressurized the head of L&D and said, look, I need to get to the top of the people. I said, all I'm requesting is half a day with all of them, CEO, senior leadership team, the whole lot. Wow. And eventually, after many years of asking, I got it. And oddly enough, he wouldn't attend because he knew what I was going to do. So I got my presentation ready, I got them in, and I kind of hijacked them a bit because I said, right, I'm going to tell you exactly what I've learned in your company. You won't like it. But by the way, I'm autistic, so don't shout at me. And here we go. And I just put both barrels out there in the most professional way I could, but definitely very clean, hard hitting. And I think the prime moment of that session was when one of the women in the room stood up and just sort of tapped the table, and she said, the crime here is that we're hearing things that have rippled through from underneath for so long, and we've said they weren't really happening. Here it is, she said on the plate. We have to do something. And they never did. That just, honestly, it crushed me because I just believed they were on board. But then I later found out there were certain blockers, as I call them in there, that were just going, no. And I know it's protection. That's all it is. You know, some people don't want to be shown to be weak. And I'm saying this is not about being weak. This is about developing and learning, just like you're asking me to do with your people. Come on. Yeah. You know, it just frustrates me hugely.
Wow. Okay. And biggest success?
The biggest success, I think, was with a military supplier who were all very much ex-military. And so they had a certain way about them, if you know what I mean. And they didn't want anything, excuse my expression here, but it's exactly what they said. We don't want anything pink and fluffy, emotional intelligence. So I had to convince them that emotional intelligence wasn't just pink and fluffy. It wasn't what they thought. It wasn't just for females. And in fact, we all have emotional intelligence to a certain point. So I had to end up proving that they use emotional intelligence to some part. And then I had to prove that it came just as easily and, you know, as well for men and women, it doesn't matter. And then I had to convince them they had to improve it. So they had to get rid of that male macho type image they were trying to, you know, and I never do anything wrong and I'm not weak. And we try to say, but vulnerabilities is showing those things to us anyway. Our belief is it's a sign of strength. And when you show your vulnerabilities to your people, they will then open up to you in return. And you get that clean communication again throughout the organization, where it's a bit like one of those electric spinning balls and the communication just go around in every direction possible. And everyone wins from clean communication. You know, how can you make an informed decision if the information you're getting is not correct because people have hidden it? It's ridiculous.
Wow. Wow. So, I mean, how often is like individual culture? You must run into blocks with that as well, right? I mean, it seems like there can be so many elements that can sort of challenge someone coming in with ideas about emotional intelligence. How do you overcome some of those things? Is
Yeah,
it just
I usually ask, I mean, if they're very, very doubtful, I'll say, right, let me do a free workshop for you. Pick the people you think you want to go in there to come back and feed back to you, and then we'll see what they say, and you can either engage me or you can tell me to leave, etc. And yeah, that's quite useful, because when you go in, I know very often that senior people, some of them are feeling threatened that some guy's going to come in and say, you need to change, you know, because that kind of sounds a bit threatening, you might say. And we do it in a very sort of healthy way, and we use a lot of Socratic type questioning, where we're not telling them what they should be doing, we're not telling them why they should be doing it, we ask them to discover it. And we ask them for things that have happened at work over the past 2 years, maybe in their company, another company, doesn't matter. And through that analysis of various things that we've done, they come to realize that actually this is needed in the organization. And when we get to the analysis of clean communication and that type of talking, and then the clean information that comes in with it, so the only way you're going to get that is if people feel free to talk. If people feel there's a block or a barrier, it's a problem. And going back to the culture thing, that's quite fascinating, because we talk about organizational culture, but within an organization, you can have two teams sat beside each other who both live in a different environment of culture. Mm-hmm. And then you've got the perceived culture that the people at the top go, look at our website, look at it painted on our walls. We do this, all our people are like this. No, they're not. I had an executive stood up one day and said, I'm not happy with this. I'm not happy with what you're saying. My people love their work. I said, how do you know that? I asked them. Well, what did they say? Yes. Oh, well done. That proves it then. I said, all you got was people saying yes. That proves nothing. And he was not happy. But it just sometimes makes them reflect on things. You know, even one guy who had literally asked me to leave the company, and 2 weeks later, he phoned me up and he said, I've calmed down. He said, I was really annoyed because you were right. And we got chatting, you know, and that's a real sort of feather in his cap. I said, well done, because that's a tough thing to have to do sometimes.
Wow, Mag, this is just so fascinating to me. I just want to like drink this stuff in. I'm just so interested in all of it. So thanks for sharing all that. Okay, I'm going to shift a little bit more to things that are more individual about you, and then maybe later on we could talk. We can do something separate about emotional intelligence, because I'd love to learn more. But so you've had a career in training for 30 plus years. I mean, you have been there for 3 decades. You've seen, like, you know, e-learning sort of show up, a variety of things, shifts that have happened in learning and development. Is there anything in particular that really stands out to you in the 30 years you've been doing this, where you've seen things change?
You mentioned e-learning there. I remember when it trickled past my sort of radar, and I just thought, witchcraft, what's this? You know? There's no way was I ever going to get involved in this. And I remember the wonderful Colin Steed got me involved and said, you know, you need to do something in these lines. And I thought, oh, okay, then I'll do something. I'll do one of these things called a webinar type thing. And the weird thing was, I found it so extraordinary that I'm talking to a computer back then. You know, what's going on? Where's my people in my classroom? Because I was just complete classroom orientated. But then I discovered that you could be interactive. You could still have those sort of engagements with people. And I fell in love with that as well. So when the pandemic came along and lockdown started in the various parts of the world, well, I just looked at it and thought, so we just shift everything more online, because there are people who very much, and a lot of my clients are the same, who say, we want it in the classroom. So we'll just wait till this little pandemic's over in about 4 or 5 weeks. Don't worry. And we'll get back in the classroom, you know. And of course, we now know what's happened. So they've almost had to push back. But the biggest sort of changes, I think, is attitude, I think, to learning. There used to be a very sheep dip orientated type way of doing courses, and you went and did time management and it did this and it was for everybody. And I think one of the beauties when I decided to go independent, I knew I had to do that, because I was getting frustrated going to an organization to train them in something, and I'd get there and think, you don't necessarily need this. Actually, now that I've been chatting to you, you probably need that, because you thought you needed that, but you don't, you know. So it gave me that flexibility, and people's attitudes I found fantastically different over the years. There's that more openness and acceptance of listening to people, whereas before the people at the top decided what everybody else needed. Now there's far better discovery about what do people really need. You know, one of the guys that we're working with at the moment is towards what you might call performance management. They've given it a different title, which is fine, but it's run so differently. And again, it comes down to how you do the feedback. You don't give it, you facilitate it using questions. You know, and that's something that a lot of people would never have done, because feedback's feedback, but it's far more powerful with questions.
No, absolutely. Totally agree. So if you were able to talk to somebody like a trainer that was just starting their journey, which I get a lot of those here in this community, and you must talk to some of them. What kind of advice do you offer to people that are just beginning their profession as a corporate trainer?
Okay, so this is either good or bad. It depends on your ears when it lands. I often say to people, look, generally when you start as a trainer, you'll model yourself on someone or a couple of people. Just remember, they're not necessarily the best. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, because when I model myself on the person that I was being mentored by, I did what they were doing, and then gradually I just thought, this is not good. So it wasn't that they weren't able to train. They just, in my opinion, were a completely didactic, presentational trainer. I didn't like that. I wanted to engage with the people. And back then, with the recruits we were training and the trained soldiers and officers, I wanted two-way communication. I didn't want to be this lecturer that stood up with the old viewfoil slides and things like that. You know, so I'd say, do keep that in the back of your mind, but of course, soak up everything they can give you. But I'm being biased, I would say, get the understanding of emotional intelligence, because it's a really good foundation to understand how we really should be communicating. And it's very biased, but how we should be communicating with people. We have to be able to open up. We have to show our weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and be quite happy to say, do you know what? This thought of standing up in front of 100 people terrifies me. Why can't we say that? Why do you have to hide that behind some sort of facade? Because when you open up and say that, people can address those problems. It's like going to the doctors. You can't go to the doctor and just say, I'm not well, but I'm going to tell you what it is. You know, you've got to go and give them all the symptoms. And that's what you should be doing in training.
Wow. So if there was like a young trainer that is asking for advice, and you recommend researching emotional intelligence, where would you have them start?
The very simplistic side of it. And then again, this is my sort of version of EI. Just look at the sort of four elements. The self awareness is we don't know ourselves as well as we think. So for me to become more self-aware, theoretically, if I don't know what's going on, I need someone else to tell me. So I often say to people, look, if you're going to go into a position where my daughter once did, she went straight from one of the team into a management position. She said, oh my God, what do I do? I said, ask your team what they want from you. Ask them how they want you to lead and manage them. Ask them how they don't want you to lead and manage them. Ask them what annoys them about maybe the previous manager, what they loved about the previous manager. Take all that on board. And then you'll have a better starter for 10 of where to go. And I think sometimes as a new trainer, what we do is we walk into that classroom to start doing our sessions, and we are very, very nervous. And the last thing we're told, well, that's back in the day, I'm not quite sure now, don't tell them you're a new trainer. You know what I'm saying? Tell them you're a new trainer, because they will empathize with you. And if you make a mistake, have a laugh. I still make mistakes now. I still have a laugh about it. Yeah, it's not that big lion thing that you need to be scared of.
Wow. It makes so much sense. That makes so much sense, Mac. Thanks for sharing that. So what kind of projects are you working on now?
Well, the one we've just finished off is quite an interesting one, because an organization who was merging with another organization, and they said, we really need to hit the people skills running here when that starts. So what do we do? How do we run this? You know, they were the experts in their field of specialism, not a problem, but people skills, floundering a bit. And again, really, really good, because they turned around and said, help. So we did a few sort of fact-finding things, went in to find out about the culture of both organizations, got people to chat. And then we got the main top people in together into an online sort of forum where we had about 40 odd people. And we said, look, this is how things have to work in the future. And I am quite prescriptive, but the thing I do at the start is I say, look, whatever I say today, if you don't like it, challenge it. You know, and again, I used to have a slide. I use it all the time now, and it says, you know, if you don't like something, tell me. If you think I'm wrong, please tell me. I love it, because the more we get challenged, surely the better that is. What if you challenge me on a training session and I go, do you know what, Lee, that's fantastic. Thank you. Next time I don't make the same mistake. I've got another tool in my toolbox. So they found it really interesting that we just talked about this emotional intelligence side, and it just again lit their fire. But just they said it's so logical, and I went, right, hold on. There's a problem with the eye. It's very simple, very easy to understand, but putting it into practice means you've got to be vulnerable. You've got to open up and share, and that can be challenging, especially if you're a leader quite high up, and we're asking people to literally say, here's how I feel about things, honestly. But it's the key. No one else will open up to you unless you open up to them. That's my belief.
Yeah, just being able to display that vulnerability, it just seems to be key, and it is a shift. I mean, I even over my career, I've seen that, where initially it was all about just smoke and mirrors and trying to, pretend that you were, something bigger or better than you actually were, when you weren't being actually very transparent at all. So that definitely makes sense to me. Wow, that's amazing. So, Mac, who or what keeps you inspired?
Oh, people. Yeah, I'm fascinated by people. I'm worried about communication, how we communicate. There's a phrase, the only thing wrong with communication is we don't communicate. We think we are, but we're not doing it properly. So what I love is my mindset is when I go to an organization, I don't go in as a trainer, facilitator, consultant. I go in to help people. And with that mindset, I find out what's going wrong. I then have some very open, honest conversations in a room, and we chat about various things. Then I get to the people, and from those people, we get the confidence going, we get the honesty going, and then all the little sort of niggly bits come out, as I'm sure you know yourself. And that's when we start really addressing the root causes, because it's the symptoms. We can't treat the symptoms if the root cause is always still there. And that's the hardest point, but that drives my passion to try and get down and fix it.
Wow, I'm so fascinated by that, because also knowing your background, like having autism or neurodiverse, it seems like you've had to overcome that to be able to be inspired by people. Has it been a big challenge for you?
I think if I'm really totally honest on this, it's the annoyance I get. I think I wrote something a while back. I can't remember if it was on a document I wrote, but I said what really keeps me going is the frustration and the anger sometimes that I get when I go into an organization and say, what are you doing? I've been doing this for 18 months and you are still doing the same thing. Why get me in to do this? And I do get really quite annoyed, and people sort of sit back and think, whoops, he's off on one of his little trips here. But why buy? I mean, my analogy is, why do you go to a supermarket and buy a grocery shopping, big trolley, and take it back and leave it in the kitchen and watch it rot? Who does that? And if you said you did that, they'd all go, you're crazy. But we go in and we train people, and they spend thousands of pounds on us, and they do nothing with it. What's the difference? So that's the sort of thing that drives me nuts. I can feel it now. I'm getting annoyed. Just thinking about it triggers me.
Yeah, and it really is. It's fascinating to sort of to listen to your motivation. That really is really interesting. Mac, you're not going to believe this. I just looked up at the clock, and it's like we've done over 30 minutes, but I feel like we just started. So I'm going to have to wrap things up a little bit. But
Sure.
Let me just ask you this last question, and thank you so much for sharing all of this wonderful information with us. If there's one thing that people should know about you, about Mac Macdonald, what is it?
I think, the one thing they need to know, if they're going to speak to me, contact me, bring me in for a chat, I will tell you what I think. It's like once my wife literally asked me that question, do you think I've put on weight since I got married? And I went, God, yes. And she flipped a table over. She spoke to me 2 days later and said, look, I've calmed down. And I said, do you remember we always said we tell each other absolute honestly the truth? And she went, yeah, but it just work out a better way of saying it, Mac, So I do work on it. And I always say to people, look, I have got a sort of autistic streak. I will say sometimes things that might shock you or surprise you, but it doesn't come from a bad place. It comes from a really heartfelt place that I'm trying to make you understand the severity of this. And once they get that, I think that's great.
I love it. Mac, thank you so much for doing this. I'm seeing lots of kudos in the chat. Joe Cook saying that you're genuine and lovely. It was a treat being able to talk with you today. And I hope we'll be able to talk again at some time soon. It's really a wonderful experience.
Anytime.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I had a lot of fun. And I also want to remind you, tomorrow, we're going to be talking with Tanacha Tanacha Gaines. So please feel free to join us tomorrow for another showcase. And then don't forget AIDC21.com. That's our accessible and inclusive design conference that's happening in July. It's free. Sign up. We've got already about close to 400 people registered for it. Hopefully it doesn't sell out, but sign up now if you can. AIDC21.com. And Mac, thanks again. We'll see everybody next time. Bye, everyone.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.